Hello everybody, welcome back to RogueReefing and welcome back to Prehistoric Kingdom. In today's video, I'm going to be going over all things paleobotany here, and we're going to be talking about each one of the different species, what paleobotany is, and how it affects your animals here in the game of Prehistoric Kingdom. Now, a quick disclaimer before we jump into the video here. This is all being filmed in the early access version of Prehistoric Kingdom. So if you're watching this in the future, just know that some things may have changed, but for the most part, the mechanics of this and all of the species that I'm talking about today are more than likely going to be in that 1.0 release. So most of the information should still be relevant to you long into the future. If they do ever come out with a new species of plant or animal, there will probably be a video down below of a sort of one-off going over that plant there specifically. Hey everybody, Editor John here. I also just wanted to give a quick shout out that I forgot to mention in the video during recording. I wanted to give a quick shout out to MagnanimousMatt and Teutonicus over on Steam and on Discord as well for all of their help with the paleobotany and for creating a killer guide over on Steam as well that I have linked below to all of the plants that are in the game currently and previously and hopefully before as well. Without their work, we would not be able to talk about any of these plants in as much detail as we can. MagnanimousMatt and Teutonicus, thank you guys so much. If you are watching, your work has been invaluable to the prehistoric community. So before I get into the video as well, let me just go over some introductions in case you are new to the channel. My name's John, or RogueReefing, here on YouTube. I am a Florida master naturalist. I'm not a paleobotanist. As much as I would love to be, that would be super, super cool. Plants are actually not my strong suit. And I'm actually more interested, in the animals, which is where I got into Prehistoric Kingdom from. As I said, I'm a Florida master naturalist. I used to work in museums as well, with my main focus being in Florida prehistory. So dealing with things like the mastodon and the giant ground sloths that lived here in Florida millions of years ago that are now long extinct. Prehistoric Kingdom has been one of those games that has been absolutely phenomenal for recreating these sort of habitats. And now with paleobotany, that is even truer the case now. So first and foremost, what is paleobotany? Well, paleobotany is the study of prehistoric or extinct plants. And more than that, it's the study of how those plants shaped the environments that they lived in, what sort of environments those plants would have found themselves in. Like, for instance, one of the plants we're going to be talking about later is the ginkgo tree, which is still alive today. A related family member is still alive today. But during the Jurassic was found by marshy, wet riverbeds. Those sort of low-lying areas. So it helps paleontologists to learn more about the animals, the dinosaurs and prehistoric mammals and things that lived in these areas by studying the plants. Paleobotany is one of those fields that is super, super underrated, but is still really important when it comes to recreating these sort of environments in this game and, in educational senses of the context as well. So in Prehistoric Kingdom here, paleobotany can be found under your Park Services tab up here in the corner. And then if you don't worry about all of these escaped animals and you go to the dig sites, which is the Tyrannosaurus skull and the mining axe here, and here we can see a map of the world with all of the paleoflora dig sites. So all of these are completed for me specifically, but if you load up a new game, these will all be found, unchecked here. And we can actually change the way that we're filtering this so you can see what that sort of looks like here. So if I click on the Hell Creek Formation, I have not dug the Hell Creek Formation yet, so I can assign one of these dig teams here to go out and dig all of these animals. Gee, I wonder which one that one is, or that one. I will never ever know. But we can go up here again and sort to paleoflora specifically, and we can then click on one of these. And for instance, the Kansas Rocks Formation in Utah has these specific plants here that, again, we're going to talk about all of these here in more depth. We're going to talk about some of them, you know, a little bit more specific than others. But this is how you get paleobotany. This is how you get these prehistoric plants. Just like the animals in the game, you have to dig them up in order to have them in your park. Now, for those of you that are new to this channel as well, this is Paleo Springs. This is the park that we've been building here on the channel for about the past half a year now, probably more than that. But we're nearing episode 20, and after this update released, again, if you're watching this in the future, we're probably long past episode 20. But as of creating this, this is for episode 20, not to date that. Or this video is not episode 20, but you know what I mean. Yeah, anyway, moving on now. So paleobotany, what it does here in this game is it adds a enrichment bonus to your animals. So for instance, if we go over here to, let's say, a Torvosaurus right here, we have Coco the Torvosaurus, and if we go under the habitat here, Coco has too much forest to begin with, but that's a problem that we will address in a different episode. But Coco also has 0 Mesozoic flora, so that means that Coco has no plants that she is familiar with. You know, we have these sable palms, we have these grasses here, we have these other palm trees, pine trees, things like that. And she's happy with all of these scrubland and coastal biome habitats here. She feels familiar with them probably, that, you know, this looks and feels like a scrubland, but it doesn't look and feel like a scrubland from, you know, 65 plus million years ago, back during the Mesozoic, specifically the Cretaceous time period, I'm sorry, or the Jurassic time period here where the Torvosaurus lived. It doesn't feel like a Jurassic scrubland here. Whereas if we go over to our Smilodons, if we can find them, if we go over to our Smilodons, they're a little unhappy right now because of the low enrichment here. But if I click on Norma here, our female Smilodon populator, the South American species of Smilodon, we can see that her Cenozoic flora is up to 100. And that's because the Cenozoic species of plants are the plants that we have today. We still are technically in the Cenozoic era. You know, in the timeline of history, we're no longer in the Mesozoic. The Mesozoic ended 65 million years ago with the death of the dinosaurs. But the Cenozoic is still alive and well, and we are in it today. So all of the plants in Norma's habitat here, all of these grassland biome plants here, are familiar to her, and she likes it. She has just enough forest. She has just enough of the specific biomes here. So for these Cenozoic plants, we're not going to talk about most of them just because, you know, these are already the plants that are in the game. So we can see the American tarwort here. We have a marula. Oh boy, we're already getting into it here with the pronunciations. The names of the prehistoric plants are absolutely no better than these. But again, they're happy with all of these sort of plants here, and to them it feels like a grassland from not that distant of a past, again, because this is Cenozoic. So same goes for the mammoths, same goes for the elasmotheriums and you know, coelodonta, and also for our megaloceros here as well. They are happy. They have 100% Cenozoic flora here. And if we go to the rating, you can actually see the breakdown here. So Paleobotany is accounting for an extra 122 points here for Pasha, our megaloceros, and that's adding up here from that base rating of 813 points. So they're getting an extra 122 points here on top of that, which is adding up to this number, not including some of the milestones that we have here included in that, which again, we're not going to add those into this figure here, but basically Paleobotany is something that you want to look out for, especially if you are in challenge mode, which this park is. If you are in sandbox mode, which I imagine a lot of you probably are starting off with this game, if you are in sandbox mode, all of these paleoflora plants will count as food for the herbivores as well. So again, going back to the megaloceros, they would not need one of these feeders, and the keepers wouldn't need to feed them because they can eat the plants that are in their habitat. They're familiar with them, they know they're not toxic, you know, so on and so forth. But if we go over here to our Brachiosaurus habitat here, again, let me just move him. He is stuck, she is stuck. Sora, the brachiosaur, that's a fitting name. Sora here cannot eat any of these plants. Again, zero Mesozoic flora here in this habitat, so she doesn't know what any of these plants are, and especially she has some wetland biome here in this habitat as well that she's not too happy about. So again, if you are getting into paleobotany, these plants here are super important to pair with these animals here as well. So to give you an idea of this, for instance, we're going to go here and you can see under your terraforming tab, this first bracket of foliage painting, this is where you're going to find all of your plants. You've probably found this already, but we are going to change this now to be Scrubland, because we're going to add some Mesozoic flora here to Sora's habitat to make her a little bit happier. So we're going to add the Scrubland Jurassic Forest here, and that's fitting because Sora is a Jurassic dinosaur. So first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just remove some of these trees here. I'm going to get that intensity way up. Maybe I can't. Again, this is still being this is still in the early access build of the game, so that is okay. But we're gonna add some of these plants here, and you can see that Mesozoic has gone up to 7%. So Sora is gonna be very happy here in her new habitat. And again, these plants here look absolutely incredible. We're gonna talk about each one of these here, but yeah, I am super excited about Paleobotany being added to this game. I think it's going to add a lot to it, a lot more than it already has, and it's just going to make, you know, these cinematics for these dinosaurs here just that much better. So with that being said, we're going to jump on over to the other park that I have built specifically for this video here, so that we can talk about each one of these plants a little bit more in detail. All right, so we're here in the save file where I have laid out all of these prehistoric species for us to go over and talk about a little bit more. Because there are so many of them, we're not going to talk about every single one in depth, but we are going to take a sort of close look at each of them and talk about at least, you know, what I think is interesting, how they look, where I think, you know, they can fit in your parks there, you know, going forward. But you might not be able to see all of these plants here, just because for whatever reason the draw distance in this game is still not that far away. So you can see, like, we can't see all these letters here, which means that a lot of these smaller plants that are in this update, you're not going to be able to see them from far away if you make a giant forest, which to me is fine. It still gets the point across, and the larger trees, you know, of course, are what's the biggest draw for these big forests here. But in these forests, you always need the small stuff here. So like for the temperate biome, this is the cinnamon fern here. If I zoom out, you can start to see that small one will go, and then the other one, and then, you know, as I zoom out, they go as we get further and further away. So just something to keep in mind there for the draw distance of all of these smaller plants here versus the larger ones. All right, so we're going to talk about the boreal plants here first, and this biome only comes with 2 plants here. There's a few other biomes that come with that. The desert, grassland has 3, and I think those are really the only smallest biomes there. But you know, for desert, I don't really understand why there are only 2, but for boreal, it kind of makes sense. You know, I wouldn't expect too many plants to have existed in the Cretaceous and Jurassic time periods from the boreal environments, these colder environments that, you know, we would see things like mammoths and other things like that. But you know, mammoths in the Cenozoic period, so on, just kind of relating to modern day. Not that we would see mammoths in the Jurassic or Cretaceous period, not to get too far off track. But anyway, we only see 2 of these plants here, and in my opinion, these are both really, really great ones. So we're going to start over here with this first one. This is called Aculea, and this is a fern. And one of the interesting things about Aculea is it sends out these runners, and these runners here are basically creating new plants. So you can see kind of, you know, represented that we have these plants sprouting out, we have these ones sprouting out, you know, so on and so forth. But there are 4 variants here, all the way from this very, very big one here to these very small ones. And these very small ones are going to be great to tuck into landscapes there. You can see these ferns don't really look like modern day ferns. They look kind of more alien, I guess you could say. A lot of these prehistoric plants definitely look like they're from a different planet there, but to me that's part of the cool thing, is, you know, to think that these did exist on Earth at one point. But you can see these fiddlehead fern like appendages that it has, or growths that it has there, similar to modern day ferns. Again, this is a really, really great one here that I'm excited to use in my parks, not just in boreal environments. The next one we have here is Athotraxides, and this one to me is very, very interesting because this looks like a lot of the junipers that you would see in Utah or Colorado, especially up higher in the mountains. And this is a really, really interesting one to me. I love the texture of this bark here, this sort of weathered, windswept look. You can sort of see here, you know, this one, especially this one, is like been shaped by the environments there. And this this species here also comes with 3 dead variants. Now, to me, I don't actually know if these variants here are truly dead, because they do have some coloration here at their tips, which to me tells me that these plants are alive and that they're just waiting for the right moment to regrow this foliage here to reemerge into a different time period. All right, moving on to our next biome, we have the coastal biome. And I believe this one, or it might be the temperate or tropical biomes. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't done the count. But I believe this is one of the biomes that is larger and has more plants. I say that though, but it is kind of cheating because these 3 plants here were in the game prior to this. Again, this is all being filmed in the early access version of the game, but these 3 plants here, the pine tree, the sequoia, and I always forget what this one is called, the Teutonicus fern, were all in the game prior to Paleobotany being added, but these are classified as Paleobotany plants because they were around back, when the dinosaurs were around. So they sort of flagged them as being Paleobotany enabled, which means that if you build a park here in the coastal map, you're kind of already set up for success for a larger boost if you put dinosaurs in that require the coastal biome there, because they're already going to be familiar with those plants there. So again, it adds to the enrichment of those different animal species. We're going to come down here to our first species of plant, and this is called Conioteris. Now, Conioteris is a fern from the Jurassic and early Cretaceous period, and to me this looks like a lot of the ferns that you would see today. So if I put up a picture here of the nature preserve that I used to work at, these look like a lot of the ferns that we would have in our understory there, both native and invasive species of Boston fern, shield fern, things like that. This looks like a very close relative of those. Similar to the last one though, it has these runners, these roots here. But the thing that's most interesting to me about ferns even today is that these models don't really have it, but ferns have pores almost, or holes underneath their leaves where they store their spores. And these spores, they release and they get caught in the wind, and they go off and then reproduce that way, and spread their genes, spread their species, that sort of way here. But these ones have runners, so I'm not exactly sure if these ferns have spores or not, or if they only have these runners, but it's just something interesting to me. Now this one comes with 3 variants rather than the 4 before, a very small one, a medium, and then a very large one. These are going to be great again to tuck into those landscapes there and sort of blend and overlap them with other species. These are very, very, very useful and very interesting to me nonetheless. All right, moving on to our second species in the coastal biome here, and that is Ellatides. And I know that I'm mispronouncing all of these completely wrong, so I'm going to throw them all on screen when I record or when I edit all of this. Now, these are very, very large trees. We can see the largest sequoia here behind this species of tree here. And sequoias are some of the largest trees that we have here on Earth today, but this plant here, this tree is so much larger than that. I genuinely don't know that I would ever use this super, super large variant, or even the second largest variant, but I would use the ones that are about the similar height to the sequoia that we have in the game, just to try to keep the scale there of everything. But this is a very interesting plant. It is apparently in the cypress family of trees, so it is a gymnosperm, and we can actually see that it has cones here on its fronds here. And it has these cone-shaped leaves as well, similar to pine trees today. But this is a very gorgeous plant. This is a very useful one. I especially love this one here with its forked trunk. You can actually see that this is 3 trees that have been growing together over time I really love that sort of stuff. I always love seeing that out in you know, the real world as well, when trees sort of grow close enough in proximity there to one another. Coming over to our third plant here in the coastal biome, this is a interesting one. This is called Ebovania. I don't know how to pronounce it, but this is apparently a member of the cyad family, and to me this doesn't really look like a cyad. These look more like modern day cyads, or something, you know, like I would see here in Florida, at least, with the bulb there and then the fronds growing out of it. Cyads are some of the oldest plants that we have in the fossil record, but this is a really interesting one because it doesn't have that. And this one comes with 4 variants here. I especially like the smaller variant. This is going to be super great for placing in and mixing in with other foliage there. This one as well, just to add a little bit of a different texture there to those landscapes. But you can see that it is related to the cyads here. It has these little bulbs, you know, similar to the cyads there in the back, but this one comes with little tiny bulbs instead of the big giant bulb there in the background that we have for the modern day sort of cyads. Next, we come to probably one of my favorite plants that they have added into this game, and it is Ginkgo yemenensis. Now, ginkgos are alive today. There's one species of ginkgo that is alive, and it is called Ginkgo biloba. I have talked about this one before. It is one of my favorite plants of all time. The leaves of ginkgos are super iconic, and you can kind of see here these forked leaves that it has. Ginkgo yemenensis, I believe, has similar leaves to Ginkgo biloba today, but this is a very versatile plant, especially, again, these smaller variants here when it comes to landscaping and detailing those different areas there. This one also comes with another variant of 3 trees growing together. It's kind of a trend that you'll see with all of these paleobotany species, the 3 trees growing together. I don't know if there's any sort of significance to that, or, you know, if they found fossil records like that, but with these ginkgo trees, both this one and the other species in the temperate biome, you'll see they have these seasonal variants. Now, I personally am torn on these seasonal variants. I know a lot of people like using these when it comes to landscaping their different parks, and especially for photography, people use these a lot. And I think that that's a great use for them, of creating a landscape, sort of seasonal landscape there, and using them that way. To me, though, I probably would never use these in a park. To me, my stance on seasonal plants is, if you're gonna have seasonal variants, make the whole game have seasons. You know, they added breeding seasons into the game for the animals, but these seasonal plants here, I would love to see these change to these over time. Maybe they'll add that eventually in the future. Maybe they won't, but, you know, we'll see what happens. Again, it's a little bit of my opinion here in this little overview of all of these plants. Next, we come to another prehistoric plant, and this is called Nilsonia. And Nilsonia is a very interesting looking plant to me. It is a member of the fern family, again, as many of these plants are, but you can see it does not look like any sort of fern or cyad that we have living today. It almost looks like you crossed a banana plant with these fronds here with a sort of cyad and a palm tree together. But I really love how these look, especially these tall variants here. These are super cool. But you can see where it's sort of related to those cyads, where these are sort of bulbing out there, just like modern day cyads. And, you know, it has the same sort of features there, but a lot more rounder in texture and a lot skinnier and taller than a lot of the other cyads and ferns that we have. But Nelsonia is a very, very interesting one there that I'm super excited to put into my parks. And the last three species that we have here in the coastal biome, these are all, again, plants that have been in the game before, but they are still worth mentioning. So first and foremost, we have over here the redwoods. These are your sort of pine trees that you would find in, Northern California, coastal biomes around the world. These redwoods here, if you've been watching Paleo Springs, you'll know that I put these in place pretty much anywhere that we take down the sequoias. And that's because sequoias take hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years to grow, and in my personal opinion, if you're building a park, it's going to take forever for these plants to grow. And unless you're building a park that is set hundreds of years in the future, then you're going to be clear cutting a lot of these forests here. So it would serve you better to probably put some of these redwoods and even the pine trees, as those are the plants that are going to first colonize those areas back after they've been clear cut for development, at least more realistically, at least. This one here, though, is one that we've sort of talked about here before in this coastal biome, but this is the Teutonicus fern. Now, the Teutonicus fern is a member of the cyad species as well. You can really see here the closeness in resembling those modern cyad species that we have. Again, this plant is alive today, and this comes with 5 different variants here. Very, very, very small to a much taller one, and if you ever use the coastal brushes before Paleobotany was added to the game, or even after, you're probably going to see these and wonder what the heck they are. Teutonicus ferns are really interesting. They date back all the way to the late Permian period. So even before the dinosaurs were around, these Teutonicus ferns existed here on Earth. So they're a really interesting one to have in the game. Moving on to our next biome, here we have the temperate plants, and there are a few plants in here, not as little as the boreal, but definitely not as many as the coastal or tropical biome that we will see later. But the temperate biome here is still really, really interesting, and I think if you're building on a temperate map, these are going to be plants that you would want to use even if you are not interested in paleobotany at all. So the reason for that, we'll come down here to the first one. This plant is called the cinnamon fern. Now, the cinnamon fern dates back to the Triassic period, and to me, this is an absolutely gorgeous plant. This looks similar to ferns that we have alive today, but these fronds here, that it has these spore catching devices, I guess. I don't really know what they're called. Let me know down in the comments if you do know what these are called here. Gametes maybe, but these are super interesting, and I believe this is where it probably gets the name of cinnamon fern, because it looks like a piece of cinnamon that you would peel off of a cinnamon tree, to create cinnamon as the culinary look to that. Now, I believe I remember reading somewhere, and definitely correct me in the comments if I am wrong, and I will pin it above, but I believe that these are actually members of the cinnamon family as well, so it's related to the plants in the cinnamon tree. If it's not this one, it's another species in here that I thought was really interesting to imagine, going back in time to the Jurassic, Triassic, Cretaceous periods, and seeing that or smelling these forests, trying to think like what they would smell like, I think is kind of interesting, rather than smelling like dinosaur what. Anyway, moving on. Moving on to the next plant that we have here in the temperate biome, and this is another ginkgo. This is Ginkgo adenotoides. And Ginkgo adenotoides, again, one of those extinct ginkgo species that are similar to Ginkgo biloba today. This one here, you can see, has that characteristic ginkgo leaf look to it. I absolutely love ginkgo trees. I love Ginkgo biloba today, and the leaves on the ginkgo trees are some of my favorite things in the natural world as a whole. This is a plant that I would use even if you are not going to be using it in the temperate biome. I would use this plant almost everywhere when it comes to landscaping and detailing and just adding different textures to your forests and stuff. I would use Ginkgo adenotoides over Ginkgo yemenensis pretty much every day of the week. I love how this looks. I love the sort of rounded shape that it has versus yemenensis, that's sort of that tall pointed look there. This to me looks like more of a modern Ginkgo biloba tree. As before, this also comes with seasonal variants. You guys know my thoughts on seasonal variants, so I won't go over it again. But this seasonal variant here, you can see compared to the one in the background, is a lot brighter. So this is more of a yellow, where this is more of a sort of orangish hue there. So different cases of different seasonalities there, and definitely going to be used in different circumstances. All right, our next plant here is called platanites. And again, I know I'm pronouncing that wrong, but platanites here, this one looks pretty much just like a standard tree that you would have today. There are members of this species that are found all over the world, in North America, in the Eocene, to Scotland, maybe China perhaps, but this is a plant that is very, very similar to trees that we have today, but just extinct. So this is one that you're going to want to dot in those forests there in the temperate biome and use pretty much all over the place if you can, for just added texture and character to those temperate biomes there. All right, so coming to our next plant here, this is Trochodendroids. Again, I'm going to put it up on screen. I'm not going to try to butcher the name here, but this is a very beautiful bush here that we have, small tree bush there. And this is mostly from the North American, Asian, Greenland parts of the world. And again, you can just see how beautiful this plant is. You can see what I'm talking about. The green of this plant is gorgeous. The growth of it in this sort of upright fashion, similar to a very bushy plant today. Comes with 5 different variants here, from very small to this larger one here, which I absolutely love, this larger one. And then it has these red berries that I believe are berries. Again, if we get close enough to these plants, you can see that they're 2D, so that the game is not bogged down with more geometry than it needs to have. But these red berries here, super beautiful to me at least, and it has pretty generic looking leaves and bushiness otherwise, but this is a very useful one, of course, in building those prehistoric biomes. All right, moving on to our next biome here, we have the scrubland. Now, this is a environment that is very interesting to me, at least, because this is an environment that's not that common throughout the world. Really, the only places that I know of that are known for their scrublands are, places out by the deserts like California, Nevada, places like that. Spain is another place that has huge scrublands, Spain and Portugal. But here in Florida as well, where I am, also has massive scrublands, and unfortunately they are the places that are prime real estate development because they are easy to build on. The foliage isn't that tall, you know, nothing like the prehistoric foliage here. But anyway, let's jump in here and talk about this. So the first plant that we have here is actually this one here in the back. This is Araucaria delivoriaceae. And this is a species of Araucaria which is still alive today. This is a ancient extinct species. Again, you can see how tall this tallest one is compared to the sequoias. I probably would not use these four right here out of this. That said, I love the bark. I love the way that this looks here. This is a absolutely gorgeous plant. These four, though, I would use pretty heavily throughout the parks. These are pretty interesting, you know, when it comes to landscaping, detailing buildings or exhibits and things like that. Now, I said Araucaria is a species that does exist today. In today's world, it is native to the southern hemisphere, places like New Caledonia, places like Australia, Tasmania, places like that. But this is a plant that has become invasive where I live here in Florida. Not this plant exactly, but its modern relative of the monkey puzzle tree is one of the species that I see pretty much everywhere here in Central Florida. But it's a very interesting one nonetheless. The fronds on here, these are similar to modern day pine trees, but if you've ever seen a Araucaria plant today, they are needles, like pine tree needles, are a lot thicker, and they almost look like long fingers with spines on them coming out of the tree itself. They're very cool, very beautiful plants here. Again, I love this bark here, this sort of black, white, and gray pattern that it has. I think these could be very, very useful in a lot of different circumstances. These ones here, I'm sure somebody is going to make some incredible park with these four taller ones, but for me, keeping it more realistic and more grounded, these four here are probably the ones that I would go with the most. Now, this next one here is Cyadioidea. Again, I know I'm pronouncing that completely wrong here. And this is what's called a cyad adjacent plant or a cyad-like plant. These look, again, like modern day cyads. However, they are not related to cyads at all. But these are plants here that are super common in the fossil record, and they were even known in ancient times to ancient peoples throughout the world. They would find these scales and the fossils there, and you know, this is part of where one of the mythologies of dragons come from. People would think that this was dragon scale skin, you know, because you couldn't find a dragon, but you could find the scaly skin, you know, similar to megalodon teeth. Ancient peoples thought that those were the tongues of dragons, the stone tongues of dragons, you know. But moving on, you know, from that, these are plants that are very interesting, and I could see these used in a wide variety of circumstances where you want a cyad but you don't want to have a real cyad there. And these come in a lot of different variations here, from a very tall one to, again, these really small ones. These are going to be great to tuck into all sorts of different areas here. Yeah, I really love these. I'm really curious if anybody knows what these protrusions underneath these on the bulbs actually are. What these protrusions are. Are these flowering? Are these fruiting? I would doubt that they are fruiting, but I don't know. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. And again, Matt Teutonicus. If you guys are watching, definitely let me know what those are down below, and I'll pin your comment for everybody else to see there. Moving on to our next species, this is Glycenia. This is a low-lying shrub, and to me, this is a very indicative scrubland species. This looks very much like the modern scrub species that we have here, you know, where I live in Central Florida, of very, very small, pointy, jagged scrublands. If you've never walked around in them, are very harsh environments. They're very sandy, and so by having that sandy soil, that means that not a lot of things can grow there. You know, they have to have very, very deep tap roots, but it also means that they want to protect what little water they have. So they typically have these sharper, smaller leaves on them to scare away predators and things like that. But they also don't really grow that tall. I say that, and of course, you know, we have these giant Araucaria, but of course things were different down in the Jurassic and Cretaceous time periods, the Mesozoic era, if you will. But Glycenia is a very beautiful one. I could see this used for a lot of landscaping detailing, like lower lying foliage, where you just wanted a different texture here. And I love that not all of these fronds here are the same color. Not all of them look like they are alive or doing well, quote unquote. But this comes in 4 different variants, from a very large to very small. These are going to be great for your detailing of different buildings and things. These will definitely be great for those landscapes in the actual habitats that you're building there as well. All right, so moving on, we have our next plant here. This is Watsoniocladus, and this is a absolutely gorgeous tree that I could see using all over the place, really, in scrubland environments and paleo scrubland environments here. In modern scrub environments, this is probably the tallest that you would see, but in these paleo environments, these prehistoric environments, these taller ones, of course, are, you know, what you're gonna see here. And this one, this tallest one here, is on par with this Araucaria there. So I think if you mix, if you know, do like I was saying with those 4 smaller specimens of Araucaria and then these, I think you're going to end up with a much more even looking forest and a much more interesting looking scrub environment there for those habitats. But this is a very interesting one. And again, if we look at the leaves here, you can see that they almost have this like scaling to them, like a modern day conifer would have. And this is actually a extinct species of conifer, so there are no living relatives here of the Watsoniocladus around today, and they completely disappeared before the early Cenozoic period. So probably around the same time that the dinosaurs went extinct, this plant went extinct as well. But it's absolutely gorgeous. It actually reminds me a lot of the Boreal tree that you can see there in the background. I forget the name of it already, but this twisting and turning bark there that sort of looks like it's been weathered over time in this environment. Super, super gorgeous and super useful for a lot of different cases and a lot of different environments there. All right, so moving on to our next plant, we have Zamites. And Zamites are a very interesting and very important plant for these prehistoric ecosystems throughout the Mesozoic era. You can see that these are flowering. They have these beautiful flowers on them, and these are very, very important for fleshing out a lot of the ancient environments of the Mesozoic era. They are completely extinct today, Zamites, but they have similar family members, that are not in the same genus, but very adjacently related to them. They are an order of seed plant that is, again, very important for flowering and then dropping seeds throughout these scrubland environments. And this one comes with a lot of different varieties as well. Comes with this big giant, almost candelabra looking one here. You can see some of these flowers are closed up, and that's super cool. These larger ones I would probably say are fully pollinated, and they're creating those seeds there, all the way to very small, to like a very small, almost twig like plant. These, again, as I've said with all of these smaller variants here are going to be super useful, super important for fleshing out those landscaping, those detailing around buildings, whereas these larger ones are going to be much more useful for the scrub habitats, the scrub environments that you are creating there in your parks. Moving on to our next biome here, we have the desert biome, and this one again only has 2 plants, similar to the boreal environment that only had 2 plants over there. These 2 plants I don't know would flesh out an entire prehistoric Mesozoic ecosystem, but nonetheless they are very interesting. These are going to be your plants that you're going to want to use for Velociraptor, for Protoceratops, and for now Oviraptor as well. You know, all of those Mongolian species of dinosaurs, these are your desert plants that you're going to want to use for those. That said though, these plants pull their weight, especially this one, and we'll actually start here. This is Ephedra, and Ephedra is a shade tolerant woody shrub, according to MagnanimousMatt. This is found in warm temperate areas. Again, this is lumped in with the desert biome because that's really where most of these plants would probably live. However, both of these plants probably would be closer to watery areas and closer to shady areas as well in these deserts. You know, you imagine deserts even today, very hot, very harsh environments, and life is going to exist on those fringes of where you would expect them to live today, especially so in the Mesozoic era. So Ephedrus here is a very useful plant, I would say. I love how the leaves almost look like little pitchforks there, or little tridents there. There's super interesting looking leaves, and especially these 3 are going to be super useful in fleshing out those environments, those Mesozoic habitats that you have for you know, Velociraptor, Protoceratops, so on. Moving on though to the second one, this is probably the hardest name to say, and I have been trying to practice this one specifically for a while. This is Welwitschiophilum, I believe. Now this is a very interesting plant. This to me does look desert. It looks sort of like a aloe plant, but these smaller ones here almost look like a tropical plant, similar to like a bromelia that you would find today, especially these ones here. They look very bromeliad-esque, but these larger ones here definitely look like a aloe plant or a agave plant, something like that. But you can see this plant is definitely a desert plant because of these striations that it has in the actual fronds itself. You can see this plant is constricting all of the water that it has to try to save every last little bit of water that it can to conserve it inside there. And I love how a lot of these trees here, or a lot of these plants, you know, just throughout this update, are not perfect. They have these sort of dead spots here. And again, if you have your random rotation and random scale turned on, when you put a thick patch of Welwitschiophilum and Ephedra together, you know, these dead plants aren't going to look repetitive, and really they're going to look super great together. And these I can even see, you know, using in desert foliage, in building as well, you know, landscaping around buildings and things. But yeah, the desert biome, super small, but I think these two pack enough of a punch where you could probably use these in a lot of different circumstances. Moving on to our next biome, we have the grassland. Now, this is an important one to remember, that during the Mesozoic time period, the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous, there was no grass, really. So when we talk about these grasslands, we are talking about grasslands in the sense relating to those environments that they are today, but they are not grasslands like we have today. Really, these sorts of plants here are what you would see, and they would be quote unquote like acting like grass in these sort of environments. So grasslands here only have 3 plants, but I think these 3 are going to be super useful in recreating those grassland environments, you know, for things like Oranosaurus, Spinosaurus, you know, Carcharodontosaurus, things like that. These are going to be super useful for those, and I'm really excited to see how you guys use them in your parks. But we're going to start here with this one, and this is called Teutonicus. And Teutonicus is in the family of cyads. Again, doesn't really look like a cyad, but it has these you know, scaly parts to it, which are indicative of a lot of the cyads that we have seen here. These are very low-lying plants, again similar to ones that you would find in scrub environments today, but Teutonicus is from the Triassic all the way to the Eocene, so the very, very early part of the Cenozoic period. These plants were still around there, and they were mostly found in the northern parts of northern continents plus South America as well. But yeah, these little cyads here are super, super interesting. I love their leaves, these sort of rounded shapes. And I think if you put a ton of these together and sort of make a pseudo grassland with these, I think these are going to look super great. You know, I can already see, you know, a bunch of these, if using the brush tool, just laying them down really, really thick, your intensity like all the way up to maybe 100, and really painting it down and throwing a few Oranosaurus in there. Again, you're going to want to use like the substrate material or like a rocky material for the ground underneath these. Do not use grassy material. The grassland material that we have in here, which is right here, the grassland grass. Don't use this if you're making a Mesozoic environment, because that's going to be, you know, not realistic. They wouldn't have had that grass there for these Mesozoic environments. If it's Cenozoic, you could get away with it, but if you're making a true one-to-one Mesozoic environment, you're going to want to use these 3 plants as your grass, if that makes any sort of sense. So moving on now to our second plant, we have Raffordia. Raffordia is a extinct plant here that sort of looks like a fern, but I don't actually think it is classified as a fern. MagnanimousMatt says that it's a weirdo, but Raffordia is sort of, it looks like a normal fern. But again, I don't think that it's related to modern day ferns. It looks like a lot of the ones that we've seen here with the runners of the roots here. These are going to be great, putting all of these together and trying to create, again, those grassland environments. It comes with 4 different variants here. These smaller ones, of course, like I've said before, are going to be super useful for landscaping around buildings, whereas these larger ones are going to be much more useful for habitats there as well. Now, this last one here in grassland, Schiziopteris, Schiziopteris. Okay, yep. This is one that's more closely related to Rhafordia like before, but these are the ones that I think I am most interested in when it comes to these prehistoric grasslands. You can see that it kind of has these fiddlehead fern like structures here. These I think again are related more closely to Rhafordia rather than modern day ferns, but these taller plants here are going to be super useful when it comes to landscaping in a Mesozoic habitat for the Ouranosaurus and things like that, those grassland dinosaurs. These are going to be super useful for that. Even these smaller ones here, I can see patches of just Schizioptis there, Schopsis there in the habitat. That's going to be super amazing today. And these ones actually have modern day relatives in subtropical and tropical areas. MagnanimousMatt puts a name here that again I am not going to try to say, but I'll try to remember to throw it on screen now. Again, if I don't remember, if editor John forgets, because there's going to be a lot during this, go down in the link below and you'll find it there in that guide that Matt has created. Moving on to our next biome here, we have the wetland, and I am personally super excited for this one. I'm super excited to start making some Mesozoic wetlands in my parks and really use these plants to the fullest extent. For this showcase here, I didn't have to, but I created this little water patch here just to show plants here sticking to the water surface, so you can kind of get an idea of what they would look like when you actually place them in your park. If you use the brush over here for these plants, it will actually attempt to, there it is. If you use these hydrophytes or the Mesozoic lotus, these will actually stick to the water surface when you use the brush. So it's super useful in that regard. But we're going to jump in and we're going to talk about this one here first, which is Cobania. And Cobania actually looks very similar to modern day frogbit, if anybody knows that from their aquariums. If you have an aquarium and you have frogbit in there, take a look at it. This probably looks pretty similar to that. This is a free floating plant similar to frogbit, duckweed, water lettuce, things like that today, but it is pretty aggressive. So similar to things like water hyacinth today, where these are going to completely take over an environment if you have them in there. Obviously, this is a game and they're not going to do that in the game. They're not going to spread naturally. That would be super cool if they ever did implement that, but something to think about is that these are a pretty aggressive species. So if you do put them in your habitats there, they are going to want to, or you are going to want to put them in a larger quantity together of these plants. Maybe have a pond just with these. But I love how they look. I love the leaves here. Again, they look very similar to frogbit there. And they do have roots underneath. So there's still a bug in this game where if you place something below the water surface, you can't see below there. But one day, whenever they fix that, hopefully they'll fix it by the time this video is out. But one day, these are going to look absolutely incredible once you can see those roots there underneath the water surface. Really add just an extra layer of depth there to those habitats and those little ponds that you create throughout your park. Now, the next plant that we're going to talk about here are these, and I'm super excited. These are probably my favorite plants in this update. This is Equisetes, or horsetails. Now, we have modern day horsetails here that are related to Equisetes, but you can see just how much taller these Equisetes are here. And these are going to be perfect for your Triassic environments. These are some of the first plants that started to colonize those Triassic wetland environments there. And any sort of area where you have water, if you have a Plateosaurus habitat, this is going to be pretty much what you want to use by the water's edge. Now, Plateosaurus probably won't like that. I'm not going to look in the Paleopedia right now, but to my knowledge, they don't like the wetland environments, but this is going to be perfect if you're wanting to recreate those Triassic German environments there of hot and humid. These are going to be perfect for that. And I love horsetails, modern horsetails today. I think they're super cool. They're pretty much living fossils. But Equisetes, you know, these are taller than a human. So, you know, having these in your park are going to be super, super, super awesome. Moving on to our next plant here, we have Hydropteris. Hydropteris is a small extinct plant. Again, looks very similar to a lot of the plants that we've seen here, just sort of adding a different texture, a different leaf shape to these wetland environments. Similar to all those ferns that we have seen before, they have these runner roots here so that they can spread out on the surface. They have these sort of fiddlehead fern looking appendages to them or growths to them. These are going to be great for a lot of your wetland environments where you're creating for, you know, Nasutoceratops or Parasaurolophus. You're going to want a lot of these coupled with a lot of the other plants that we're seeing here as well. Now, moving on to the next plant we have here is Marsilia, and I believe this is actually a floating plant, or it could be a floating plant. If I move this up, you can see it has those roots underneath, or, you know, maybe they just modeled the roots under there, but this is a really gorgeous one. They almost look like clovers to me, or, you know, similar to duckweed today as well on the water surface. You can definitely use this in place of duckweed, or, you know, sort of pond scum if you want to use it like that. If you're making a pond or a lake, if you add a bunch of this is going to be sort of that that makeup for not having duckweed in the game. Marsilia is going to be a very great one to use for these wetland environments of having just these low-lying sort of marshy plants where, you know, these will fade into the background for sure. Other plants are definitely going to take the stage, but these are ones that you definitely don't want to sleep on for the Mesozoic wetland environments there. Now, coming over to our first tree in the wetland biome, this is Metasequoia. And this is pretty much identical to the modern day relative of cypress trees, of bald cypress trees. Now, you can see these models don't come with the roots, the knees that cypress have, pond cypress and bald cypress, that they have in the real world today, but we do have those parts there that you can place down in game if you wanted to give it a little bit of extra texture. I actually don't know that Metasequoia would have had any of those, but you can see, just like with a lot of these plants here in this Paleobotany update, these are pretty much as tall as the sequoias are for the coastal biome over there. So I would say if you're wanting to go more realistic for your habitats, use these smaller 3 versus these larger 2. These are also Metasequoia. These are, I think, classified as a seasonal variant. Yeah, seasonal variant there. Again, same thing as with the ginkgo trees that they've added in this update. The seasonal variants, use them wherever you'd like. Personally, I would probably use these seasonal variants more than I would use these brighter ginkgo trees. These are just too bright in my opinion, but this is more realistic, and I could see this scattered around throughout a, you know, ancient recreation of a Mesozoic wetland and just having a different color, a different texture there to those forested environments, those wetland forests there. I would super use these over, you know, the much brighter ginkgo trees that we have there. Moving on to our next plant here, we're kind of jumping around here with this one. I don't know why I placed them in this order, but this is our next plant here of Nelumbo. And Nelumbo looks very similar to modern day lotuses and lilies, but they're actually not related to them at all. They are a early member of the flowering plants there, but again, these also have roots, so these are going to look super great in wetlands where, you know, once we can see under the water there, they're going to be super useful for fleshing out those environments here. Now, just because of how big and broad Nelumbo is, even the smaller ones here, the small one, I believe these are pretty close to the same size here. We have one that's flowering and one that is not. These are going to be super useful, interchangeable for those ponds there, where say you wanted a pond that wasn't covered in lotus flowers or Nelumbo flowers here, you could use these non-flowering variants and sort of get a similar effect of, you know, just a pretty standard wetland there. Now, moving on to our next aquatic floating plant, we have Querexia, and this is a crazy looking plant to me. I love how these are sort of star shaped here almost, and of course with all of these they also have roots there underwater that are super useful once we can see under the water there. But these really look, you know, similar to the plants that we saw before over here. These look like modern day frogbit, Amazon frogbit, or you know, water lettuce, water hyacinth, things like that. These look very similar to a lot of those plants that we have living today. So you could use all three of these aquatic plants pretty much in your ponds. Even if they are not prehistoric ponds, I would say you could use all three of these in place of modern variants that we don't have in the game. Now, this one here is very interesting. This one is called Weichelia, I believe. Again, I'm going to put the name on screen, but Weichelia is a very alien looking plant. You can see that these roots here almost look like modern day mangrove roots, the way that they're coming down and sort of going into the soil, into the substrate there, but with a sort of palm tree fern like top. You can see that these fern tops have, you know, those like fiddlehead fern like attachments to them. But to me, this plant here specifically screams Mesozoic. This is what I would probably think of if I think of a, you know, Pseudoceratops wetland environment, you know, a ancient Mesozoic wetland. This is probably what I would imagine would be the dominant species in these areas here, and would probably be food for a lot of those animals in that area, again, of like Pseudoceratops, Parasaurolophus, things like that. This is a really interesting looking plant. I love these scales that it has here, the fronds that it has as well. This one's going to be super useful, and again, with those roots there, it's super alien looking. So I love to see how you all use it in your habitats. All right, and coming to our last biome here for the paleobotany, we have the tropical biome. And this is one that has quite a few species here. Again, pretty standard with the, I'd say, coastal and scrubland environments there. Are actually probably about as many as the temperate habitats there. But these ones are going to be super useful, again, if you are creating any sort of habitat from the Mesozoic era, these are going to be the ones that you want to use for those tropical environments. The Mesozoic, again, is one of the hottest periods in all of Earth history. Hottest and humidest, most humid, I guess you could say, parts of Earth's history. So most of the world was tropical at that time. So these are going to be plants that you're going to use pretty heavily there. And we're going to start over here in the back. And this plant is called agathis. And I absolutely love this variant right here, this thick trunk. It almost looks like a modern day like baobab tree. But agathis apparently is a plant from Oceania with, diversity in New Caledonia. I believe it has species that are alive today and thriving there in New Caledonia and Oceania, the Philippines, those sorts of areas there. But this is a absolutely crazy looking plant, and I love the bark on this tree. And these smaller ones here, I actually don't think I would use all that often. Again, I'd probably use them around like buildings and things like that. But this one here, these four, I would probably use all over the place if I'm making a Triceratops or a Tyrannosaurus habitat. These are going to be absolutely invaluable to use for a lot of those habitats that you're going to be building. Moving on to our next species, we now have Archianthus. Now, Archianthus is pretty much a standard tree looking plant. You can see it has these flowers up top though. These almost look like daisies up in the trees there. And the shape of the leaves also are very, very interesting. If I can try to zoom in here, close enough, they almost look like a two-pronged fork in a sense, but more rounded there. But these are going to be very, very useful for, again, those tropical environments that you're creating. And I think all of these, with the exception of this one here, are flowering, which I think is kind of strange. I don't know that this plant would flower in every season 24/7, but I'm not an expert on these kind of plants, but I love that it comes with as much variation as it does, so you can create these tropical environments in a lot more detail than you would normally be able to for these Mesozoic environments here. Now our next species here is called Chloranthoids, and Chloranthoids is a flowering species, again, from the tropical environments in the early Cretaceous period. This is really the time when early flowers were starting to take place. And again, it's important to reiterate, with all of these environments here, these Mesozoic environments, there wouldn't really be grass. So this is how you're going to add these grassy textures here to these forests, as well as add some pops of color here with these very, very small orange flowers here. I absolutely love how these look. These are super interesting, and especially these non-flowering variants here. These are going to flesh out a tropical Mesozoic environment super fast, a lot faster than many of the other plants that we've seen for the tropical or even coastal biomes there. These are going to be great intermixed there with the coastal foliage for, again, something like Triceratops or Tyrannosaurus Rex, to give those environments a much more like tropical feel. Now, our next plant here in the tropical biome is another really interesting one, and another one that is flowering here. So these tropical Mesozoic forests are just going to be filled with flowering trees, apparently, and shrubs. You can see they have a very small bush variant here for this, but this is called laurels, and this is sort of a genus name for a much larger species of plant rather than something specific. Like, you know, we've talked about before, like the cinnamon fern, that's a specific plant. But laurels here are alive and well today, but this is an extinct variant of the laurels, and these are some of the most common trees that we find in the prehistoric record. But some of the laurels that you might have heard of, that you might have even used, are things like bay laurel, or if you've ever used bay leaves in cooking, these are related to those plants. So again, we talked about, or I mentioned earlier, what these ancient forests might have smelled like, and they might have smelled, you know, very earthy, of course, but you might get hints of cinnamon or hints of bay leaves here in these forests. And I think that that is absolutely incredible. You know, I would want to smell these flowers. I want to know what it's like in this forest, what these animals are experiencing there. It comes with these larger variants. These are going to be super useful for those denser forests that you're creating. But again, these lower lying shrubs here, all the way to these smaller variants here, these are going to be great for pretty much every environment. And again, these are flowering all the way down the line. There are no variants that are not flowering. I don't know how accurate that is, but I think it's interesting nonetheless that the tropical biome here is beginning to flower so much, and we can definitely see the difference when we compare all the other biomes here to the tropical one by how many flowers there are here in game. And our very last plant that we have here in the Paleobotany update is this one right here, which is Pseudocytinus. So we have in the Grassland biome, we had over here Cytinus. This now is Pseudocytinus, or, you know, meaning fake Cytinus plant there. This is alive and well actually today. This is pretty similar to the Cyads that we have here today. This plant here, I see this outside almost every single day here in Central Florida where I live. This is a Cyad through and through. This is a plant that you're going to want to use almost everywhere. This is one of the most common fossils that we find in the fossil record. Again, one of the most common plants that we have. These here, you're going to want to use these absolutely everywhere, you know, within reason. If you're creating a Florida park, a Florida-based park, this is going to be the plant that you're going to want to use in almost every landscaping job that you do. Every piece of foliage around a building is absolutely going to have this plant right here, the smaller ones, and maybe this one. The other ones, these skinnier ones, these definitely look more prehistoric to me. You know, these aren't really something that you would see that often today where I live, at least, but these are a plant that have been around since the early Triassic period. So they've been around throughout history. They have been through the ringer when it comes to mass extinction events. But yeah, this is a really great one, and it's a great one to end off on. So we're going to zoom out here and take a look at all of these plants again. You might not be able to see all of them just because of that draw distance, like I mentioned earlier, but these are all of the prehistoric plants that we have here in Prehistoric Kingdom. So if you've made it to this part of the video, if you've made it this far, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. I make these videos for you guys. I make them for myself as well, to be able to look back and see, you know, some of the things that I've thought about or I've said, but I really make it for you guys and for your enjoyment, for your education, for your knowledge. So if you've made it this far in the video, please consider giving the video a thumbs up, a like, and if you're not subscribed to the channel already, definitely consider subscribing below if you like this sort of content. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below as well. What was your favorite plant here that we went over? What are you most excited for about paleobotany in your parks? Are you going to be taking photographs? Are you going to be building things just for your sandbox parks? You know, yeah, I'm super interested to hear all of that sort of stuff that you guys have going on. So again, I really appreciate it. If you want to see these videos early, as soon as I upload them to YouTube, consider becoming a member. It's like $3 a month, and you get every video that I upload to the channel, early access to that as soon as I upload it. Or, you know, it's not required. You can still watch them when they come out to the general public, but something else that you know, I have to put in there to keep the channel going. So yeah, anyway, without further ado, that is all that I have for you guys, and that is all that I have here in Paleobotany. So thank you so much for watching. I will see you all in the next one. Take care for now.